before we wrap up, I would like to, if your game, spend a little bit of time all the way back on the what I expected this conversation to be about.
Yeah,
But
sorry, we
we
went.
went. No, that was great. I'm happy with all the discussion. But so back to embryos.
Yes.
I do not feel like I can really. If you're willing to let me ramble for just a minute or
Yeah.
two, I want to try to guess at your position, but I'm probably going to get it wrong or have like missing pieces or inaccuracies. So you can correct
go
me.
ahead.
I'm hoping correct me. So okay, so the question to me is basically like consistent life ethic, human life is intrinsically precious, worth defending, has a right to not be aggressed upon. This I'm on board with in the abstract, and I'm on board with many of the applications. And I'm on board with no infanticide. But then when we say an embryo, like a 1 day or 5 day, 7 day embryo, that's a human life. And therefore the consistent life ethic also applies to this embryo. At least currently I just get all the way off board at that point. I'm like, I don't understand. Like, it's an interesting, it's like I don't want to accuse you of playing word games at all, but I just get tripped up where it's like, wait, okay, I agreed with the thing about human life, and an embryo is human life, but maybe that's not actually what I meant. So you actually mentioned this a long time ago in our conversation, and also there's some writing about it on your website, I think. There's the, what did you call it, the personality ghost?
The personhood fairy.
Fairy, sorry.
Personhood fairy, yes, come along.
The personhood fairy.
The personality ghost.
Sorry.
Good.
Yeah, I might have been thinking of the ghost in the machine, if you know that metaphor.
Yeah.
So the personality fairy, so here, okay, now attempting to state your position. There's no particular line where a human life, a biological human life, a living, individual, unique, separate, complete, developing human life, there's no particular line where that becomes a person, and the clear boundary for a consistent life ethic that says human life must not be aggressed upon. The clear boundary is life. So, and an embryo is a human life, and therefore it gets this protection, and so. Okay. Well, now I will. Yeah, like to me, yeah. Okay. So that's my simple attempt. Well, let's just check. Does that sound right so far?
Yeah, that lines up. Yeah, I think that you've got it so far. Is that the embryo is a human life in the earliest form, and since we believe in protecting all humans from aggressive violence from conception till natural death, that they fall within that umbrella of human life that should be protected.
Okay, and then. Okay, I guess maybe my thoughts are actually kind of off track. I'll say them out loud just to have them said. But so my possibly off track thoughts are like, for me, I'm like, I do think there's such a thing as personhood. I do think it's separate from life in like the technical, in like the biological sense. And then I do think it's ambiguous, but I think it is different from conception. And then from there, I'm like, how can I understand the desire to draw a nice clear boundary around human life? And then, so there's a couple ways I understand that desire or stance. One way is a kind of political thing where it's like, you need to have a political policy. You need to have a clear boundary for that political policy. And you want to, so you need a clear boundary, and this is like the clearest boundary. That does make sense to me, because I agree that where personhood starts is more confusing, ambiguous. Maybe it's a gradient, or we're unsure. Maybe it's conceptually unclear. So, and then similarly to the political principle thing, there's a question of having a consistent life ethic. In other words, having a simple value or principle that can be strongly affirmed across many different contexts and therefore coordinated on socially, morally, and politically, where it's like this is a clear principle, it applies across many contexts, it makes sense, it's a clear boundary, and because it's clear, we can coordinate on it, and it's good. So there's that, and then there's, again, similarly, but not exactly the same, there's a personal ethic where, like if you're a judge and you're supposed to have high integrity about separating law from financial incentives, it's like, what counts as a bribe? Well, I mean, if someone invites me over for dinner, like I'm allowed to have friends, I didn't renounce having friends. Well, this person, if they're directly involved in the case, that's probably not good. But what if they're a friend of the lawyer or they're whatever? There can be gray areas, and then it's like, as an ethic, even just for your own personal, not necessarily as a social moral thing, but just personally, if I want to not violate my own sense of what I want to do in the world, I want to have rules for myself that I can follow, that I can set up when I'm not compromised, when I'm not being tempted. I can set up a rule when I'm not being tempted, and the rule is good, and if I follow the rule, I won't do bad stuff. And then later, I have this ethic, and I'm like, and now I'm tempted, it's ambiguous, I can talk myself into things, but if the rule is clear and is broad enough to prevent the likely bad behaviors, as long as I just ethically follow this rule, I won't do the bad things, even when I'm tempted. And so that is another kind of thing where the clear boundary of a human life is desirable over a more debatable, conceptually unclear personhood idea. Is that part of the idea, or?
Yeah, it's part of it. And I can kind of touch on several of those things. So for personhood generally, personhood as a concept, right, is often and historically been used to say that this class of humans has rights, but not this class, because this class of humans, while we'll accept their humanity, they're not persons, right? Like, this is something that you see with slavery. This is something where you're saying that for whatever reason, we do not consider you a person from a legal stance. We can say that you're some sort of subcategory of human, but not person, which I don't know that it is innately must be tied to that, but it has been tied to that, right? Like, that's something that we make this distinction in order, or maybe not in order, but in consequence, it allows you to say, yes, you're human, but not quite a person, therefore you don't have the rights that we associate with personhood. And so obviously, because life ethics says, hey, no, we don't want to make that kind of two-class system. We just want to tie rights to humans specifically, not persons, because humans, as you said, is unambiguous. We can know what a human life is. We can make that, very clear. We maybe don't know what a person is in all concepts, right? Like, is a corporation a person? Kind of, like we can have these, like, this personhood gets very vague and weird, but what is a human is, something that we can answer. So, and that's, kind of when it comes to that distinction, that's where we stand there. And then, yeah, so, and then
Wait, let me just, I want to let you finish, but just to dwell and make sure I understand that, I'll try to make this quick. Part of what I'm getting there is there's an adversarial force, which is pushing against humanization or personalization, personhood granting, so the boundary has to be clear and firm because there's adversarial forces trying to push it back.
Yeah, I would say that's accurate, because it's like if you're on one side of the line, then protections don't apply to you in this scenario, right? Like, when it comes to, which is interesting to me, a lot of the law relating to IVF and embryos, they actually treat embryos as a product, like it's kind of, it's like if you're going through a divorce and you have embryos left over, it's like a property issue, not an issue related to, like your child custody in a lot of states. So it kind of, there's a demarcation, right, of how we're talking about people as people versus humans. So yeah, I think that'd be accurate to say.
And you were going to say another thing. Do you remember that?
Oh yeah. So then there's that, like there is like this, like, personhood versus humanity. But then making it consistent, it does have the value of saying, okay, so you are a human, and for other issues, like we're talking about embryos, but let's talk about people who are really bad humans, right? Like you're a human and you killed an entire family and you have no remorse and you are on death row, and like by all means, we don't think you're great. We think you're pretty bad. And maybe if you had killed my whole family, I would be myself personally wanting to get, like some sort of like vigilante justice. Like, but if we have, like you said, the framework of working as is that human life is intrinsically valuable, even someone who has done a terrible thing has not forfeited their humanity, and thus is still under like the general protection of no aggressive violence towards them. And there are a lot of cases where that gets very difficult, right? I mean, there's just like people do terrible things. Human beings do terrible things. And I think everyone, if they're being honest, when they hear of a horrible thing that a human has done, they want, have like kind of like a sense of like wanting retribution and that sort of thing. So it is good to have like a very principled stance. It's like even this case, and kind of going into like Catholic theology for just a tiny second, the idea is like we can prevent this person who is a terrible person from doing continuous harm by keeping them in prison, right? Like if we were in a different society in which there was no other way to stop this person from killing people, then maybe then like maybe the death penalty would not be as much of a problem, because you're literally trying to use like self-defense. But in this case, it's not self-defense. We can separate them, segregate them.
Right.
And so, having those firm boundaries when it's hard makes it so that you're not tempted towards exceptions that we otherwise as humans, would be, because life is complicated.
Yeah. Okay, I'm trying to think about how to approach this. I'm going to try to construct a hypothetical. You may reject it, and that could be fair,
Okay.
but let's just see what happens. Yeah. I mean, can we the hypothetical is basically, what if we remove this effect? In other words, imagine, if you will, that somehow the only effect of I'm trying to do this utilitarian thing of parsing out effects. I'm not totalitarianly utilitarian for several reasons, but like if you imagine that there's no social implication or implication for any other context, like there's no connection. This is not true in real life, but hypothetically, if there were no connection between nuclear weapons, war, death penalty, infanticide, euthanasia, if we imagine there's no connection between any of that and the question of can a 7-day embryo be aborted without being classified as murder? If in that world, what would you think?
Yeah, so I think that, it's like the consistent life ethic is helpful in recognizing a shared humanity, but it's not necessary for any individual issue to like have the through pass. It's just the base thing that you have to believe, right, to come to this position of like these embryos should be protected, is that there is something that is uniquely special, I guess, about human life generally, and that there is a difference in kind between, say, an egg cell dying and a actual like embryo that has the capacity for, continuation and becoming a baby and a toddler and, all these kind of things. And so there's like this unique essence to that human who becomes, through all their life stages, has something important about them being human. And so regardless of everything else, basically we're saying like there is something unique about humanity that requires our protection.
So it's okay. So, as you're stating it now, just to summarize, as you're stating it now, although the political, ethical, the general thing is relevant and you care about that, it's not like strictly necessary. There's even if it's just this one question, already there is something that's equivalent to murder, or it is murder to discard a 7-day embryo.
Yeah, and I think I will draw like a slight distinction when it comes to like how things are practiced and that sort of thing. I think that like the way IVF is, happens now, right? I think that there is a distinction between if you, for example, sometimes when they try to create an embryo, it doesn't actually have like the capacity to have ever go on to become a child, right? Like it's just like with a miscarriage generally, and like there are genetic mutations that are incompatible with life. And so I don't think that like if you find out that this, embryo would become a blighted ovum in 2 weeks, I don't think that there is a like saying it's murder to say like this particular embryo that does not have the capacity to become a human is necessarily like, I would say that would be murder. But it gets into like a morally gray area there where you're like, this embryo probably can't be viable, but possibly could be. Then you're kind of into this situation where, again, I would think it would be if you were trying to do this, if you were trying to do IVF in an ethical way, right, that did not have this like issue, I would say that any embryo that has the capacity to develop into a child, even if they would have these like disabilities, the ethical way of doing that would be to allow for implantation. And if that was likely to result in a miscarriage or not a failed implantation or something like that, again, that would be like a natural miscarriage. But for the ones that literally just they do not have the genetic material to go on to become a person ever, then those being discarded or destroyed, I don't think would be the same thing as murder because they lack that capacity of, humanity ever.
Okay, so okay. Simple point is, that's a helpful distinction. A simple point.
Yeah.
Simpler than that is just a key point. A key piece here is the potential for life, which people say about this issue. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's like when you talk about it, it's like there's the potential for life, and then there's like the life that already exists, and it's like, does this life that already exists, can it continue on existing? I guess it's like, because I guess you could say even in the embryos that aren't ever going to develop appropriately, maybe they have like a life that exists but it can't develop. But for this, yeah, it would be the capacity, and I keep kind of going back to that word capacity, and I do a lot when I'm talking about these kind of things, is like, does this embryo or later on a pregnancy fetus or whatever, do they have this capacity of life, and then are we ending their lives? And that would be where I say, okay, we have killed a human being at this point.
Okay. So my next question is, okay, so you say there's something extremely important about a human life, including an embryo, because it has a thing that has the potential to grow into a human. And then my question is why? So, yeah, that is an interesting question, isn't it? This kind of pulls me back to, I don't know if you've ever been pulled into this kind of argument. It's very hard to say why murder is wrong, right? At the end of the day, like outside of like social implications and people will be sad and like all of these kind of things, like why is it wrong to kill a human being? I was going to put a whole paragraph of caveats, but I wanted to just ask you. One caveat would be like, by asking this question, I definitely don't want to imply that you're supposed to have an answer or that you shouldn't have the stance, even if you don't have an answer immediately. Right, yeah. No, but it is, I mean, it is complicated to say, like, why is human life so valuable? Like, why is it wrong to kill any human life? Again, like, and you'll find people who will bite the bullet, and if you say, like, in an abortion debate, and you're like, well, what if we killed someone who was asleep and he couldn't feel any pain? Would it be okay to kill him then? And they're like, yep, that aligns with what I just argued about pain being the thing that's the problem in consciousness, like people will bite a lot of bullets because they don't have kind of the stance of like, what is it about being human?
And I think that there are a lot of answers to that. Some, I think, are like the religious answers, right? Like if you're religious, you'll say, well, like humans are made in the image of God, and that is like unique to us versus all other things. Or if you're secular, you might say, well, we have consciousness at a level that is beyond what other animals have.
Consciousness. No, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. But if you're unconscious and you have no pain, you're off. You're done. So and I think that we also have. So for me, it's like both those things. I think we also, as humans, we have this creative ability that is unique to humanity, and it's like even if every individual person. I think this is like the distinction, and again, it kind of goes back to this capacity thing. You as an individual person, me as an individual person, might not possess the ability to do some, remarkable thing. Like, we're not Michelangelo, right? But we have, like, as fellow humans, sort of this shared capacity for wonder and just creation that is unique. So even if you individually are not ever going to be a remarkable artist or a mathematician or whatever your individual thing is, you still are a part of a completely unique, animal, basically, that does. And I think that we have an element of sort of shared rights because of that. Like the fact that we are part of this group sort of inherently gives us those rights. That's sort of the idea behind like why we bestow anyone rights, or they're bestowed upon us, I guess, is like we didn't do anything to earn this. We just are members of this group, and because we're members of this group, we share in the benefits of being members.
Okay, thank you. I still don't understand, but I appreciate the next step.
Well, okay, so I guess, let me ask you, like what would you say is like for makes humans unique or doesn't make humans unique? Where are you not understanding, I guess?
Yeah, that's also going to be hard to answer. I'll say a couple of things to try to point at it. Well, so first of all, yeah, again, like I said, I think it's correct and good, reasonable to have like provisional, inexplicit moral stances or opinions that are inexplicit, that you haven't yet fully made explicit, that they're full foundations and justifications and everything. I also here would have a provisional inexplicit stance, but it would be a different one. My provisional inexplicit stance is the personhood thing. And I would not bite the bullet about pain. I am not a hedonist or an experienced utilitarian at all. More what I would say is, at least for at least two reasons, maybe more that I'm not thinking of, for at least two reasons, being a human mind and agent is, first of all, what I kind of intrinsically care about, and second of all, what I would view as like a correct political category. When you talk about rights, I think the only real thing that I think of there is some form of either literally a political coordination thing where it's like everyone should have property rights to own material property. If you have only some people having property rights, then this is just bad politically. It sets up a conflict and it's unjust. So when you say rights, I think of either like a political right or sort of a human right. I mean, but that's sort of, in a sense, it boils down to, I kind of mix, or I view politics and religion as being kind of contiguous. They're not the same thing, but they're both about like what's the overarching collective vision for how we all live together, or something. So to me, a human right would be something like what God gives us. So that's the religious flavor of like, what should the world be like as we collectively view it. So we collectively think people should not have needless suffering imposed on them from the outside, or being killed without some necessity, like self-defense or something. Sorry, I'm rambling. Okay, you asked me. Yeah, what's the? So personhood, being a mind, being an agent. Like if someone gets killed in their sleep painlessly, I'm not like, oh, no problem, they didn't experience the fear of death. I'm like, oh no, their hopes and dreams have been frustrated. Their consciousness has been snuffed out, and it probably wanted to continue. Also, like, other people were relating to them. Like, people's souls are not actually, according to me, not really actually just strictly contained in single individual human heads. Souls kind of leak out and intertwine, or are built collectively in relationships. And so if one person dies, it's you intrinsically you're kind of ripping out a part of other people's souls, basically. There's probably other things I could say, but all these things mainly involve, I'm sorry to be mechanistic, but I don't know how else to say it. They involve computations, like mental operations happening in the person's head. And if we're talking about a 6-month-old fetus, I don't know. I would have to learn about it. They have neurons. They have. I don't remember where the neurons are and which structures have formed or not.
Right.
But they definitely have neurons.
Brain formation enough that they have, a sense of pain and all of that kind of thing. And also probably, they're rudimentarily learning language through hearing it. Like there's sensations that are happening in utero at that stage that are pre-conscious, but something for sure. And yeah, that's like talking about through all that, right? Like it kind of gets into like, where's the line? We don't know. We don't know where that exists. And there's some that will say, pulling it, further forward, like, well, newborn babies don't have like really like any kind of like conscious desires or kind of these. So maybe like, I know Peter Singer, famously is like sort of pro-infanticide for a while. Again, I feel, but he stated that he can, the logical conclusion that they're not conscious really in any meaningful sense until several months. So, is it okay to kill pre-conscious, born children? He's like, yeah, I think you can. So that's where some people pull that line. But if we try to pull it back to like, where does science say that consciousness is starting to develop is somewhere, around 20 weeks. But it's like, anywhere we draw the line, it's just before the line you have someone who is in the process of developing that. So even though they haven't like made it quite there yet, they're in formation of that. And it's the same person who would have gotten there had we not stopped it, And so
but can I drill down on this? Yeah, like, so for me it is a crux about the consciousness. So I don't know what consciousness is and when it starts, but if I knew for sure, whatever this means, that a 3-day-old embryo was conscious the way that a 2-year-old is conscious, I would be like, oh my God, we have to not do IVF.
Right, we've done something terrible. Yeah.
Would you, if you, maybe this is hypothetical, doesn't make sense, tell me if so, but if you knew for sure that 14-day embryo was not at all conscious, very clearly 100% of them are 0% conscious, if you actually knew that and believed it, then would you, and let's say that everyone else knows this too, everyone has good reason to believe this, would you then
they're
not mind?
No. Yeah, because for me, it's not the actual like currently having the ability to right now have consciousness. It's that they have like this capacity to develop consciousness that is unique to being human. So
tell me more why that's the thing.
So it's like at 14 days old embryo, I'm sure, like that's like just starting to have like a little bit of like neuronation happening or something. That's before like there's like any kind of cardiac, but like you're basically just coming out of being a bundle of cells, right? So there is probably no way of measuring any kind of like actual consciousness outside of if we want to have some sort of religious like ensoulment argument or something like that. Like if like God came down and was like, actually, you have perfect consciousness upon ensoulment, and I'm telling you this, from the mountain, and I'd be like, okay, I'll just believe that then. But like outside of that, there's no reason scientifically to think that they actually have like literally at that time the ability to have a conscious, but when it comes to having the capacity to develop it, that does exist there. And so to me, it's already unique, right? They're too young, too early in development to have reached that capacity, but they are already unique among all other beings in, the known universe, in that if we just allow them to continue to grow and develop, they will achieve this level of human consciousness within the next few months. So they're already just set apart from all other members of creation, just as they exist right then.
So it is some sort of distinction, so it's some sort of being set apart, but I still don't get, sorry, this is a very basic question, and it could be hard to answer, but I still don't get why does the potential? I can ask those sort of annoying questions, which maybe they would be helpful, maybe not. Like, well, okay, you said a sperm and an egg separately doesn't count, but why not? A sperm is sort of like half of a potential, or a stem cell.
It has half the.
It's not. But in theory, you could reprogram it to become an embryo.
Right, and I actually when it comes to like all like the stem cell reprogramming, I feel like I'm like, I don't know how I feel about this, just like from a personal, from a like consistent life ethic thing. I'm like, I think maybe we can make a way to make this ethical. From a person, I feel a little squeamish about like what that means for creation. But anyways,
well, you also have stem cells in your body,
right? You have stem
dying.
cells, yeah, and so it's like, and there's also like the weird like chimerism that happens with pregnancy, where you have like things that create and circulate forever. But yeah, like what makes the egg and the sperm different? And it's like it gets like this. I'm going to say this, and this sounds very like pedantic, but like follow me. It's like the sperm and the egg individually have potential, right? They have potential to become a human. They are, and I think that is like fairly unique and like something that's interesting that we don't really think about enough. I mean, like literally, it's like it has like this like potential for like. Again, if you're religious, like something to have a soul, like it's kind of a big deal. But it has potential. But it is just still the potential there. Whereas the difference is like when you actually have them united, when you have the conception, it has gone from having just like a potential to having created an actual being at that point. And that's where the distinction is that now you don't just have a potential human, you have an actual human at the very earliest stages. And so it's still like very much in development, right? But it is like there's I had an old biology book from a million years ago that I love that said it very poetically, but it talked about like the way life unfolds in after conception, and how you're not adding or subtracting anything. It exists and it's there, and as long as you're able to have nutrients and environment, like everything that is actually needed for you as a person is existing at conception. Like who you are, who you will always be is right there. And I think that is where the distinction lies between that complete human possibility versus just like a sperm and an egg, which are more like building blocks, but aren't who you actually have become as a fully existing human.
So the sperm a sperm or an egg individually is potentially a human, but not actually a human.
Right.
And then a human, like an embryo, or like a zygote, on day one is it's, but earlier we were
It's a
saying,
human right, like it's like actually a human organism at that point versus just a building blocks of what will become that organism.
but then my maybe incomplete understanding of what we were saying earlier is that the reason we care about a human is that it has the potential to be a human soul, consciousness, mind.
Well, I guess yeah, and that's why I'm maybe being a little bit pedantic because I'm just like
I'm being super pedantic too. I'm like, there's the potential.
Okay.
Why does the potential matter, but not the potential for the potential?
Right. So I'm saying like there's like a capacity versus a potential, and this is where I'm admittedly being pedantic.
Oh, okay.
So I'm kind of defining capacity as like everything that needs to exist is there and just needs to unfold, versus a potential where it is still incomplete. It could possibly happen if like the right conditions are met when it comes to actually a organism existing. So obviously, like when you have an embryo, you still have to have conditions met to like have a live birth and all of these kind of things, but the organism exists regardless of whether or not it continues on to a healthy pregnancy and a birth at the end of it. Like that organism exists. Whereas when it comes to a sperm and an egg, that's potential could become an organism in the future, but is not currently an organism. But when I'm talking about like capacity for consciousness existing in the future, it's the capacity is within the organism itself. Does that make sense? I'm sorry. I know we're kind of getting into like weird word semantics that might not be super clear.
No, it's okay. I mean, whatever is how you're actually thinking about it is what I really want to get. I mean, this is very interesting. It's just difficult because I haven't understood it yet.
Yeah.
So I'm okay. I'm a little conflicted about whether we should go down this particular route because I'm not sure whether it's a crux or whether it actually matters. But I'll just put this out there. Like, do you? I mean, it doesn't have the capacity. Like, you need the mother, right?
Right, and yeah. So I guess it's like you do. You have to have like a mother for it to ever fully develop them, and that's the environmental aspect of it. So, but it's like the in the same way, and this I don't mean this at all to be like dehumanizing to women, but I don't know how to communicate like without this analogy, so apologies to everyone out there. But in the same way that we all need an environment, right? Like none of us, removed from our environment, all of us are going to very quickly die. And so it's kind of the same situation where the environment needed to continue development of from the embryo to fetal to stage is within the mother, just like the way to continue to develop from a baby to an infant, to a toddler is a house with caregivers and all that sort of thing.
I mean, it's like quite an intimate thing. Like it's the mother's body is like nourishing the fetus, and not just that. It's you may know more about this than I do, but my layman's understanding is that there's like significant immune system interaction where like first of all the mother's immune system is sending antibodies into the fetus to protect the fetus, and furthermore the fetus's own immune system is actually learning from the mother's from those antibodies.
Oh yeah.
Which is that's sort of like halfway between the mother giving flesh or like giving flesh to the fetus.
I mean, yeah, absolutely. Like that's why I didn't want to like discount like what it is to be pregnant is.
But it's much more intimate than like, well, I give you food and I give you shelter or whatever.
Right. And I mean, and I think that one thing that I almost went down a rabbit hole about artificial wombs and stuff, but we're staying the track. I'm not going to get dragged off into there. Is like there is this like intensely intimate relationship between a mother and a child, like after birth as well. And one of the things that, again, like in the abortion debate can get dragged into is like, well, we're using that's a very actually common level thing is like the concept of bodily autonomy, and I'm using my body and how does this work, and we don't require this of like the violinist argument and that sort of thing. But if you were, my kind of response to that is if you were a nursing mother who somehow got stranded on a desert island, right? And before you had done, like, you had nursed and you had formula and there were other ways of nourishing your baby, but now you're on a desert island. The only way you can keep this baby alive is to nurse this baby, is to use your body to, nourish this baby. Like, you would, of course, have to do that to the best of your ability, capacity, that you could. Because we recognize that there is, like, certain obligations that we have to our children that we don't have to a famous violinist or something, but there's also just something that is biologically embedded in how we reproduce that requires this, like, giving and vulnerability that again, like, we can mitigate, right? So I will get dragged into the artificial uterus. We can mitigate, we can have formula when they're born, and maybe we can have an artificial womb that is happening, and so you don't have that closely tied relationship anymore. And then that gets into all other kinds of, like, artificial womb technology makes the entire debate around abortion so infinitely more complicated, and it completely demolishes a lot of arguments and reveals a lot of, like, underlying actual truths related to what we really want when we say that we are having an abortion. Obviously, like, there is the element of bodily autonomy. That is a real thing, a real concern, something that is, like, an actual thing. But also, at the end of the day, the real thing is, I don't want to have a child in this world that is my child. But if we had artificial womb technology that we could say, okay, great, we're going to take this embryo and we're going to put it over here in the artificial womb, that still is not what people want, right? Like, if we're being honest, that would not satisfy what people are hoping for. So it's interlocked, but I do recognize, like, the particular environment of the womb is, like, a unique and particular environment for development.
Well, but I mean, I guess to put a finer point on it, the thing I'm confused about is how, or really, why should we care about that? Why should we care about this line or this distinction where, like, it's like the sperm, like a sperm it's potentially has the capacity, given the right environment, where the environment is an egg and other stuff.
Yeah, and right, and I guess my line is, and this is kind of the thing where it's like if we're drawing, like, hard lines, my line is going from not a human organism being, like, just a gamete to actually being the human organism. And it's like when you have that line in the sand that I say, this is where we have the right start, I guess, is really the question, right? Because that's really the thing. It's like what we're really talking about is, like, it's kind of inconsequential if you recognize it or not, but we're talking about it from a stance of, like, should they be protected or not? And so my line in the sand is that went from individual cells to a actual organism. This is where we say, yes, now you have explicitly the right to life. And so this is where your rights begin.
Why is that the line? Sorry,
Because,
probably literally already asked you that, but yeah.
No, it's okay. I'm like, I'll probably talk in circles about it. Because it is where we can say, like, a new person has begun, right? Or, I mean, we talk about person of human, but a new human being has begun at this point. Like, before, they existed as potential, as a sperm and an egg, and, like, but now we have an actual human being that their life has become here at this point where we can say that's the start of you. Like,
okay, let me.
As in,
maybe your answer will be, well, okay. So we could phrase it as you and I agree on 99% of blobs of cells, as it were. So 99% of blobs of cells are past where I'm like, this is a person, or very likely a person, or I don't know if it's a person.
right.
But so for that 99% of blobs of cells, we would both say it's a human organism, and furthermore, it is a human person, and therefore it's definitely has rights.
Right.
Has these rights to life, regardless of what the parent is thinking. Well, maybe whatever. They have rights to human life. And then you're saying, but then there's this 1% where, and I'm just Yeah, I still
You
don't.
just can't see it yet. And I guess it's like, I guess then my question would be
I mean,
this, and it's
let me put it in
Go
a more
ahead.
inflammatory, sharp way, so that I'm not beating around the
Yeah.
bush. I would
No,
say a human organism, up until day, whatever it is, but a human organism at least up until day 7 doesn't have human rights.
okay.
On my
So
view, yeah.
that's, yeah, okay.
And you're
So
and
yeah,
you're
like
saying and you're saying it does, and
I'm
then
saying
that's the question
it does
as well.
right. And so then the question becomes, it's like, okay, but what happens at day 7? That's different than what was happening at day 1, and why is that like what matters, right? So it's like, where's the shift?
Well, so I'm avoiding answering what would be the hard question for my current view. The hard question for my current view is like, what about 8th month abortion?
Mm-hmm.
That does seem potentially quite bad. Then you have parental autonomy, or the bodily autonomy of the mother, and political issue. Do I want the state involved? Blah blah blah. I'm comfortably ignoring that question at the moment, as long as you're letting me. And I'm just saying, like, all I'm saying is, a 7-month embryo. A 7-day embryo is definitely not a person. And the way I know that is it doesn't have neurons. It doesn't have clusters of neurons. It doesn't even have organs. And because it doesn't have neurons, it's like 128 cells or whatever it is, something like that.
Right.
It is definitely not doing the computations that are absolutely required for being a mind, being a human person, being an agent.
Yeah. So I'm going to ask you a question that is going to put you on the spot.
Sure.
So there is a condition where basically the baby's brain just never develops, anencephalus. And so, but usually, like, sometimes it can be like complete at all, and they, pass away just immediately after birth. But sometimes there can be enough like brainstem development that these children can live for a few months or so. I don't know the longest ever possible, but for a good amount of time. But without any kind of like higher brain activity. Would you say then that this child who is like breathing, eating, there in front of you, like, are they a human who should have rights? Because they don't have even like the beginning of the capacity really to have any kind of consciousness.
This is like hydroencephaly.
Yeah, like this is anencephalus, so it's like literally just like the brain just doesn't develop. I'm sure there's like various applications of it, but
like you said, I assume it has some brainstem stuff.
Right, yeah. For them to make it to the point, yeah, they would have like some brainstem activity, probably like enough like hormonal, like they're able to maintain homeostasis and that sort of thing, but they don't have any higher brain activity because the brain it hasn't developed.
Okay, so I'll give a cowardly answer and then I'll give a non-cowardly answer.
Okay.
My cowardly answer is I don't really have to answer this for the question at hand because basically it's a stronger. You're making a pretty strong claim, which is even the 3-day or 7-day embryo has to be treated with the same rights to non-aggression as a baby. And so I'm sort of like, that's the easiest, or that's the relevant thing for reprogenetics, first of all, and second of all,
right.
we have quite a clear disagreement where I'm willing to take a strong stance there, and you're willing to take a strong stance there, so that's already like good enough. Okay, a non-cowardly answer is probably it does not have moral patiency. A slightly more cowardly answer, but more realistic, is I don't know. I'd have to think about it more. I'd have to think about the ethics involved. Like a brainstem, depending on how much of a brainstem it can have. Sorry, I'm about to sneeze.
You're good.
Okay. A brainstem can have, like, that's where some of the emotions live, so to speak, depending on which parts we're talking about. And so, it could be like killing a bird or something. It could be similarly immoral as murdering a bird. Or I'm not that confident that it's not a human moral patient.
Yeah.
I could, but I guess the maximally non-cowardly answer I'm willing to give is, my guess is if I thought about it a bunch more and learned about it a bunch more, I would then say, for practical purposes, it's not a human person. That's my guess. Yeah.
Well, then I guess the follow-up question there to push you on it, even though, as you said, it's not directly connected to anything happening here, but to press your own, assumptions there, is that it goes into but even if they were not actually, if you said a human person, should they still have the legal protection that we afford people generally,
Well, that's a separate question. I have to do a separate investigation of thinking about what we want to have as our legal principle. I think a real answer would actually depend on some pretty concrete details. Like, for example, I'm trying to imagine. I don't know, if there was some enormous cost. This doesn't make sense necessarily, but if there was some enormous cost to keeping them alive, then I would. I would start making trade-offs at that point, basically. If there was some enormous cost to keeping them alive for 3 months, even though we're quite confident that they aren't experiencing anything, if you'll allow that concept, that they're not experiencing anything and they're not going to grow or experience anything or survive, then I would say it's acceptable to let them die. Does that answer the question? Or?
Yeah, no, and really I'm just trying to kind of push the edges of with consciousness. God, it's tragic that word is difficult for me to say. You ever have there's a few that's insular. It's also really hard for me. Anyways, so there's I don't know. There's just some words that get a little bit trapped in my mouth.
Yeah.
But there's but just kind of pressing on where the limits are, because I think that more so than we feel want to admit, a lot of the debate around this issue is related to just moral intuition and how we kind of feel about it and what we conceive of as someone who is part of humanity versus outside of humanity. And also then of course there are the meat and potato debates about how our rights conflict and all of these kind of things. But when it comes to this being very abstract, and I think that that's what's unique about bringing it back around to just literally the repro technology, is that the rights that are in conflict are harder to intuitively discuss, right? Because when you're talking about abortion, for example, it's very, very easy to talk about literally this woman who you're talking to in front of you, who's telling you how she feels about it and how it impacts her. You can understand that, even if you disagree ultimately with conclusions, you get that. That's very intuitively easy. And even when you're talking about an abortion, you're talking about usually a fetus that is developed enough to be identifiable as part of the human species. You can see little legs and arms on the ultrasound, so it has that kind of intuitive part of it. But when you're talking about literally just when it comes to embryo destruction, it's harder to feel intuitively defensive of what you can accurately say are literally just cells in a petri dish, right? That is a more difficult intuitive problem. And also, you're talking about whose rights are being infringed upon in this situation are literally other, cells in the petri dish. Those are the ones who we're up against versus this cell in the petri dish who we have maybe some, like I said, downstream concerns about what life looks like when we're, doing kind of genetic mutations. But, it's more complicated to have things be able to be guided by intuition at that point. And that's why I think that there is some value in having, a strict ethical philosophy when it comes to these things, because then you're not trying to figure it out on a gut level of I don't know. And there is a gut level element. There's a famous scientist who really was instrumental in starting human embryo experimentation. He was if you're not at least a little uncomfortable with this, I don't think you've thought about the issue enough, because we do when you drill down into it. We are like dealing with, human life in its earliest form. But it's harder. It's harder to have intuition around it, I think. And I don't know. I think that that's a fair point when it comes to talking about it.
As like an analogy, so I think I've seen on your website, tell me if you agree that like in real life, in practice, sometimes this can be abused, but in real life, in practice, sometimes you do need to commit violence against another person, even to the point of killing them, for purposes of self-defense.
Yeah, we are not strict pacifists. We allow for self-defense and have some, commentary on just war and justice in war and that sort of thing.
Yeah. And so you could imagine someone, not to say that you're doing the same thing, but you could imagine someone kind of similar to someone who subscribes to the consistent life ethic. You could imagine someone who subscribes to the consistenter life ethic, where they say no aggressive violence, no violence, period, towards another human. And then you could say, well, but whatever you would say, like, well, if they're you also have a right, and you have a right to defend your right. So if someone is violating that right,
literally has happened. So I will tell you just very briefly. We had so we're a part of the Consistent Life Network. We love the Consistent Life Network, but one of the members, when we first started out, reviewed us on Facebook with 4 stars because of the fact that we would allow for just war theory, because they are pacifists and they're like, this isn't consistent enough for us. They since they'll talk to us, but they don't like that. And I think I have kind of, this is not directly answering your question, but it is kind of where I stand on a lot of things, is that I actually appreciate that, right? Like we also see that with vegans, right? Some people get so mad that we are not organizationally explicitly vegan. And you know what? I'm like, I appreciate people saying you should be more consistent with this. And I think it's good to have people who are coming from like the maximalist position and saying like, no, the right way to do it is for being completely pacifist, the right way, I think that there is value to having that hard line as far as you take it in defense of innocent life. And especially the vegans, bless the vegans. My standard line to the vegans, I'll tell you that standard line because it comes up more frequently, is just that we as an organization do not have a stance on veganism, but many of us as individuals do believe that also animal life should be protected and that veganism is, the right way of living. And so that's when it comes to like someone who's saying, we should oppose all war all the time. It's always wrong. I don't completely agree, but I don't completely disagree either. I can see the argument for it, and I'm willing to entertain, like, if we want to be fully consistent in all things. However, that said, for me personally, and for, Rehumanize organizationally, we do allow for self-defense, and I think it is important. I think there is a measure of self-destruction, right, that when you just completely reject any kind of like self-preservation, and it comes across in abortion. Like there are certain conditions of pregnancy that would be fatal to both the mother and child if the pregnancy were allowed to continue. So there's ectopic pregnancy is like the prime example for that. There are individuals, there are people who would say, even if I had an ectopic pregnancy, I wouldn't do anything because I am not personally going to be responsible for someone else's death. And if it causes us both to die, then that's, God's will or whatever. That's a personal perspective. I would not ever want that enshrined into law. And I would say this is bad policy publicly, and we should have an element of like self-defense, even if it does result in someone's death. Because within like my personal ethics and with Rehumanize, like your life is also important. So the person who is like at risk, like they're also included in this and being consistently protected.
Okay, so cool. And then let's see. I'm trying to put together two things. Okay. So earlier you said, okay, so just now you were talking about right to self-defense. I had brought that up in order to talk about kind of like when you want to add some wrinkles or complexities to categories of ethics. Earlier, and I wanted to respond to something you had said earlier, which was, correct me if this is wrong, but I think you're expressing the worry or the complaint that, like, my position about personhood doesn't have a clear boundary, and you're saying you need to have a clear boundary. Personhood is not a clear boundary, and then you had been probing a little bit about what I meant by personhood and getting into some quite like ambiguous gray areas where I'm uncertain, and so, and I guess I want to. So there's twin points here. First, okay, so one thing is like the thing I'm trying to do in the part of what I want to do locally in this part of the conversation is I'm kind of trying to propose a Pareto improvement, which is a little less coherent, a little less, or not less coherent, but less simple. It's a little bit more complexified. There's just a bit more extra detail, so to speak. The proposal is embryos don't have the same absolute right to non-aggression up until day 7 or 14. We can talk about that, but let's say 14. So this is a proposed different rule from the CLE. The CLE is a somewhat complexified form of the consistenter life ethic, which is you don't do violence to other humans at all. You have a complexified form, which is you don't do aggressive violence, or you don't do violence except in self-defense, or something like this. And then I'm saying you don't do violence except in self-defense to any human life after day 14. And then that's less simple in the same way that your version of the CLE is a little less simple than the consistent life ethic. But but I'm saying, yep, it's less simple. It's therefore a little less. It has a little bit less of that juice of being super clear, bright line, political, ethical, moral, firm, adversarially robust, bright line. I'm proposing this more complex thing, but I think it's better, and I think it's worth it to have this additional complexity with the costs and risk that come with a more complex rule. I think it's worth it, just like it's worth it to have the more complex your version of the CLE. I think, and the reason I think it's worth it is stuff about reprogenetics.
Right. Okay, so first of all, I've got to tell the Consistent Life Network that they are now the consistenter life ethic. They will appreciate that and find that very funny. So I'll be sure to pass that messaging along. But then, yeah, so, okay, so I guess
Oh, wait, sorry. So there's a real thing, and it's called the Consistent Life Network.
Yes, there is a Consistent Life Network, and they are consistenter than us a little bit. They are absolute pacifists. It's actually run by a Quaker woman. She is lovely. If you want to talk to Dr. Rachel McNair, fabulous person. She does a lot of research on how being the perpetrator of aggressive violence is harmful to people. So people who maybe were executioners, or they've been in the military, or abortionists, like all these kind of different ways, and how you like kind of heal from that moral injury. Very interesting Quaker woman. She's great, and like I said, consistenter life ethic. They are absolute pacifists, so you might enjoy talking with her.
Thanks. Yeah.
Yeah, she's great. Anyways, she's actually again, very quick side note. She was doing a talk on Consistent Life Network that Peter Singer attended, and he actually came up to her afterwards and was like, "You haven't convinced me, but this is the best argument that I've ever heard for it." So she's fabulous. She's like, I'll take it. So similarly, I'll take it, right? So I obviously would prefer full protection of everyone for human life, from conception till natural death. That is what I am going for. That is what I am trying to get in the world. However, if I have someone who's like, I will agree with you on 99.9%, except for this, I can't go this far with you, but I can agree with all these other things. I would still disagree and say I still over here, but I am also very willing to work with people in that space. Like I said, a huge number of people who present at our conferences aren't even at 99%. They're at like 25% of the stuff, you know, like we love Abe at Death Penalty Action. He like is so off put by all the abortion stuff. He's like, please just leave me out of all of this. So like, we want people to see the value of human life and to see the value of protecting it and working towards protecting it. So I would definitely like say that, you know, is a win. And I would, again, disagree. I would say, you know, it needs to be from the beginning. That's the only place that really actually makes like sense in terms of like what we're trying to do. But if someone is willing to come that far with me, I certainly would not like reject them and say, no, it has to be all or nothing, or you're, you know, you're kicked out. Like, I think
that seems good. And I appreciate that. But yeah, I mean, you've been helpful on this question already, and I appreciate that. But I guess I'm still not done understanding your type of position. Is there more you could say at the moment about like why is that, like why is my proposed rule worse, or why isn't it better, basically?
Well, why isn't it better? Well, okay, yeah, like I think that's a good, like, why isn't it better? Okay, so here's
if it helps with reprogenetics and leads to lots of actual people who are who get to be healthier.
Yeah. So here's a very just like practical argument that I'm going to make for you that is like, it's not even ethical, it's just practical. Okay. So I would say it's like, you know, 20 years ago, obviously, embryonic stem cell research was all the rage. Everyone thought that it was going to be great, it was going to do all these things, everything was great, right? And then W. Bush basically greatly limited the research potential for embryonic stem cell research because of ethical concerns, right? Like he had like these concerns similar to here. And so the research had to shift to the skin cells, the induced, pluripotent cells, and into that arena, which actually ended up being extraordinarily useful. Like that became much more promising than embryonic stem cell research had previously been. Like it opened up an entire arena of research. But it happened in large part because, I mean, that's where the money was. That's where you had to go because there was like this ethical, you know, wall that prevented it from being in the embryonic stems anymore. And so I think that pulling it back to like the repro when it comes to like this sort of thing, I think that there is a strong possibility that the actual benefit that you're wanting to see might be in ethical research, right? Like I think that there is a strong case to be made for maybe it is like doing genetic changes in sperm. And I saw something that was like someone was like taking sperm out and like putting them back in and like doing all kinds of weird sperm situation. I don't know. I think we can do it that far, but like maybe that is like the actual path towards things, or maybe it is a thing where we are able to actually hyper focus on literally just like creating this one potentially perfect, you know, little embryo. And we don't need to create 1,000 embryos. We need to create one embryo that is, you know, has what we need. And I think that like my practical consideration probably is that it's like, if you allow the embryo destruction to continue as just like a part of the process, it doesn't have as much forcing function to try to go beyond it. And maybe that's not like the best thing. It's not a super strong argument, I'll give you this, but I do think there is some element of having the forcing function be in the ethical research realm. It also prevents the controversy, right? Like pro-lifers freaking love the skin cell, you know, stem cell situation, like big fans. That you get wide adaptation for that. People are not innately turned off when there's not any kind of like ethical ick that it's giving them. And so if you're trying to get public buy-in, having something that literally their only argument against are these higher level, are we creating Gattaca, you know, like that kind of thing, I think is an easier sell than we're going to create 1,000 embryos and you're going to kill 999 of them and like it's good because you get the one.
Yeah, well, so the second argument definitely makes practical sense. The first argument, I don't think it makes that. I mean, well, your example is seems legit, but I don't think, like, in expectation or something, I should expect. Like, I mean, I talk to people kind of in the area, like working on various technical research projects related to reprogenetics, and they're really funding constrained, and part of why they're funding constrained, or a big part, is regulation, or the possibility of regulation, which is related to people being, or a lot of people being, like, opposed to developing the technology, and a lot of why people are opposed is destruction of embryos. So yeah, I mean, practically I don't necessarily expect to convince a bunch of people to be okay with discarding 7-day embryos, but I guess a big part of why I want to understand that position is basically that I think that my position is correct. I'm not infinitely confident, or that confident, especially since I still don't feel like I fully understand the position. But, like, if it's true that my position is correct, and my position being
that it's okay to destroy the embryos in order to create better generations.
If everyone, or if society at large understands this, so that there aren't these, like, second order effects where, or in other words, it's how you do it. If the way that we become okay with discarding 7 or 14-day embryos, if the way we do that is stop caring about human life, that's bad. That's very bad. That's not worth it.
Yeah.
But if the way we do that is by thinking through what we care about and saying we don't know exactly what a person is, but just like we feel fine with discarding a sperm, we also feel fine with discarding a 7-day embryo. 20-week embryo, 20-week fetus, that's very controversial, and I'm not right now, or, like, the proposal doesn't take a position on that. The proposal is an ethical rule it's a little bit arbitrary, it's a little bit more complex, but it does have a clear, bright line, say 7 or 14, let's say 14 days. That's not that complicated. You can apply, that's a law you could apply. It's clear enough, it's objective enough, although there's an arbitrariness. But it should be, like, my argument is basically that should be enough that everyone, or almost everyone, if they think about it more, if they think about it enough that's commensurate with the potential benefit, or in other words, the potential benefit here is enough that it should be worth it for people to think about it enough to then say, oh yeah, now that I consider it more, actually the 14-day thing would make sense if everyone's on board, and then everyone is on board, and then we do that. That's probably impractical, and also I could just be wrong, and also I don't understand your position. But
I'll tell you kind of what I see, like, where your objections will be, and I'll just kind of, like, lay out, like, from really even, like, within, like, the pro-life movement, and, like, generally just, like, religious people, because I think, like, from a secular perspective, I mean, we do have, like, secular pro-life. We have a lot of secular members. There are secular people who hold a consistent life ethic. That is a thing. But in generalities, secular people are more okay with embryo destruction than religious people, just, like, either or. So I'm really going to be talking just more about, like, how, like, this could play out with, like, the religious people. Okay. IVF is fairly well accepted within religious communities generally. Even within communities that are pro-life, they kind of largely feel okay with the situation because you're trying to create a child. Your intention is good. Like, you're not trying to destroy any embryos. You're just trying to create this child, and this is, like, the effect. Like, a lot of people don't think about these things, to be honest, even, like, in the pro-life movement. A lot of people don't think about these things necessarily that deeply, to the point of, like, having, like, okay, this is making me uncomfortable. In the general, just kind of, like, evangelical, mainstream Christian worldview, they're not going to have a problem with the embryo destruction element unless it is excessive. I think that causes some pause, right? Because it's like when you're like, oh, I'm going to be going, like, that's a lot of embryos that are, dying. Like if it's like 1 or 2 that are being discarded, but if it's 10,000, that might feel, again, like in moral intuition, feel weird to people. So I could see that being a potential problem. And then also, like I said before, the marketing aspect of like swiping left or right makes people feel uncomfortable as well, because you're, again, like, I think there's two, if you actually see like features of these embryos that you're discarding, that makes it a lot more difficult. If you say like, this is an embryo who's is a male embryo who's expected to be between, 5'8" and 5'10" and have brown eyes, like you're actually, again, like it's like you've now made that sort of capacity very real in your brain of like, this is like who this person would be. That's a challenge.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Oh, and I was going to say, but you're never going to convince the Catholics, right? Like, hard stop. The Catholics don't even like the IVF to begin with, right? Like, they think that the only way that you can like licitly be involved in IVF at all, from my understanding, is if you're doing like an embryo adoption or something like that, and like they're all implanted and you did not create them, but you're trying to like, mitigate their destruction. But like IVF is basically banned within Catholicism as it stands right now. So adding all of this on top of that is just piling on more and more like transhumanist things that they generally oppose. So you're not going to get them to ever agree with this. Like you say, 14 days, 7 days, it's never, it doesn't matter. It's still going to be a hard no from that community.
Okay. I sort of had that sense, but now I'm a little more confident. Now that
if you really want to know how they feel, read
that would be great. Yeah.
Human Vitae. It was Pope Pope in the 90s.
I can probably find it with that information.
Yeah, but he has a whole encyclic of like on human reproduction and sexuality and how those things intertwine. And
I may have actually bumped into that because maybe it's referenced by David Bentley Hart in his essay, The Anti-Theology of the Body, something like that.
Yeah, Theology of the Body. Yeah, Theology of the Body is kind of like the expanded thing. Yeah, exactly. That kind of gives where Catholics are right now in terms of assisted reproduction, obviously in terms of abortion, but also like contraception and like all of these kind of things that are intertwined that are very much set Catholic theology apart from all other like mainstream Christian thought. I mean,
do you happen to know off the top of your head anyone who would maybe possibly talk to me about that position and represent that position?
Like the Catholic position? Yeah. So, I mean, I would tell you our founder, Amy Murphy, except for she literally just had a baby via embryo adoption about 2 weeks ago. So she probably is not in the state to have that conversation right now. But I definitely can. Let me think who I think would be like the best Catholic representative. I have several in mind, but that might want to talk with you. There's another who's Dr. Nicholas Scoville at your Sinus. He's a mathematics professor, but also Catholic and kind of a, likes talking about this in his spare time type person who might who might be interested. But yeah, I'll kind of poke around and see who I think would be particularly good, because the Catholic stance is going to be much more absolute, I guess, than mine, because mine is coming from general, like secular principles for the most part, with some, like a little bit of level of religious understanding is built in, but it's not coming from a like very set theological perspective. But the Catholics, it is like very much embedded in like social teaching. So
yeah, I mean, although I did say that stuff about maybe convincing people, I'm also purely intellectually interested in understanding. I'm interested in understanding in order to, at the very least, speak more respectfully of that, even if we are doing the things that they would consider evil or immoral, or convincing a few people, or having in mind the technical question, as you were saying, of how could you maybe implement this in a way that would be acceptable to that group, to that stance.
Yeah, and I mean, it's like I said, there's, a lot of, like, within consistent life ethics, within pro-life things, people have various shades of like where lines they draw and where they are. But ours, we just try to make very clear, is just like conception, natural death. That's where we are. That's where we stay. And when we talk about IVF, we just talk about trying to not intentionally be destroying any embryos in the process. And so, and there are ways, like within current IVF that's possible. People do take steps to mitigate that, especially religious people right now will currently like limit how many embryos are created, make sure that they're all implanted regardless of, grading and that sort of thing. So there's ways of doing IVF that is not from outside of a Catholic perspective, from just like a pro-life, like trying not to destroy any human life. There are ways that currently do it that are not compromised, I guess. But
I would note that like as a practical matter or contingent matter of the technological details, I think it is the case that basically if we accelerate some of the technology, then the worlds where it's a fairly small set of, there's like the tech tree, like you could be at a different point in the tech tree or have a different set of technologies. There's not that big of a range where on the tech tree where you would specifically want to create 1,000 embryos. There are,
right,
but it's not like huge. So, even just as a purely practical matter, creating 1,000 embryos would be expensive.
Right. Yeah.
Creating 10,000 embryos would be 10 times as expensive, almost.
Yeah.
So, if there's stuff like chromosome selection or editing, CRISPR editing, it would probably look a lot more like current IVF or even fewer embryos, where you're sort of you're not generating a ton of embryos and then using the variation between those to nudge around genetic components of traits. Rather, you're doing most of your genetic nudging around through some other means like editing, and then you make one or a couple. Maybe you just make a single embryo and you just check, is it healthy or did it get DNA damage? And if it is, you implant that one, or if it's not, you make another one.
Right. Yeah, and I think that again, there are ways of doing things that are not necessarily unethical means for doing it. I mean, I know that there's some that, like I saw one where it was like, well, we can do some gene editing, but then we need a second embryo to kind of use as like a host. And I'm like, that feels like we're creating chimeras, and I'm not a huge fan of that one. But like, there's the technology. I think that there is a way of having technology that is not inherently morally compromised, and I think that we could get to a place where we're not involving embryo destruction at all, and that would be like the, I guess, ideal state for this. But then it's like, if we have a way of doing this completely without any kind of destruction of embryos, I would just my caution would be just to make sure that what we are creating and what our intentions are not somehow being anti-life, in their realities. So that would be like, again, not necessarily from a purely like aggressive violent stance, but just from a like, are we pushing towards human flourishing, question, and to make sure that is in mind, because there's just so many downstream effects that it still makes me like just have a bit of pause going through all of this at the end of the conversation. Like, are we really thinking about like the world that we're going to be creating at the end of this? If we can figure out all the ethics and make it so that doing it isn't unethical, and figure out all of those, like, there's the whole death penalty argument, right? Like, there's one of the arguments against the death penalty is like, oh, well, the death penalty is racist, and it is, right? But it's like, but if we could make it not racist, would that mean then that the death penalty is good? Like, well, no, there's other issues. So it's kind of like that, like, we can fix that hypothetically, but that doesn't mean that we've like fixed the death penalty. So at the end of the day, I just want to make sure like that what we are trying to create is in and of itself like a good end. And I'm not totally convinced that it is. I have still lots of, concerns about that. I think that there are definitely good intentions surrounding it. I don't think that you're, again, like trying to become, a eugenist or something like that. Like, I think that it is largely based on trying to help the world be better.
Thank you.
But yeah, I think that's important to note. Like, right, I don't think that that's your intention. You don't seem like you're, like calculating people's utility and like, you're out if you're under a certain threshold or something. But it just like, I still think that like when calculating doing something like this, there still has to be a, like, what is our end? And is this a ethical end? Will it be, and how it actually plays out? Again, try not to be a consequentialist, but like thinking through the end state, will this be a good?
Yeah, well, so I'm sure we have plenty of healthy remaining disagreements, but I definitely strongly agree with that. I definitely... well, I feel like the whole conversation around reprogenetics has been fairly impoverished, and that definitely includes thinking about how exactly are we doing this, including social, regulatory aspects, moral aspects. How are we thinking of this as a society? How can individual parents think about this? How do clinics interact with parents, communicate with them? All of this stuff will have effects. Some of the effects could be large. Some of the effects could be bad. We want to be thinking about these and making wise decisions that are life-affirming.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, I'll say this, like at the end of the day, that's anytime you're having a child is for the goal of having, like, trying to bring goodness into the world, I think is kind of, like why you want to have a child. And so I don't think that is so far removed from just like that general sense of trying to say that you are having hope for the future and wanting to bring goodness into the world. It's just, making sure that we're not doing it in a way that is also like corrosive to our humanity.
Absolutely. Okay, listen, Lauren, this was an amazing conversation. I'm very grateful for your generosity and your time, your energy, and sharing your thoughts and your personal stories. I'm just very grateful for you coming on.
Yeah, thank you for having me. We're both losing our voices at this point. It's been almost 5 hours. So Thank you for having me, for allowing me to talk about all of these things. And
do you want to plug anything? Like, where can people find? There's Rehumanize.
Sure. So you can find us at RehumanizeIntl.org. Also on all social media platforms, Rehumanize International. We have an upcoming conference. If you are interested in hearing more about any of these issues, we are having a conference in Washington, D.C., October 31st through November 2nd. We are going to be having people from all different of the issues related to consistent life ethic, talking about things that you might find interesting. Also, just if you are an activist, we also have like very practical things like how you can improve your amicus briefs and your donor persuasion and things like that are helpful to anyone. So if you're interested in learning more about our odd little part of the world, we would love to have you. And also, if you just want to talk to me, yell at me, talk to me, explain things, you can find me at execdirect, no T, at rehumanizeintl.org.
Great. Thank you, Lauren. This has been the BGPodcast, Berkeley Genomics Podcast. Thanks for tuning in.